Okay, starting with chapter 25. Scatcherd's death is announced in the chapter title and anticipated again in the obituary that Trollope imagines for him. It reminds us that Scatcherd is a figure of some renown, and it is as true and false in such pieces must always be. That is, it gives a fair picture of the public man and his achievements, and a wildly inaccurate one of the private man. Trollope notes wistfully how pleased Scatcherd would have been that the world spoke of him in such terms, in a voice, he writes a little sharply, that would be heard for 24 hours. Most of the chapter is taken up with the private man and with the fraught conversation between Scatcherd and Thorne about what would happen afterwards, not in the next 24 hours, but in the following years. Scatcherd's concern now is only for his son. His despair is that he cannot convince Lewis to turn from the fatal path his father has taken. All the father can do is die and leave the boy money, which itself may do no more than hurry his fate. His only glimmer of hope is that a wife might save him, and he cajoles, begs, and threatens Thorne for that wife to be Mary. Thorne is thunderstruck at the suggestion, but is obdurate as he was in preventing Mary from visiting the dying man. Trollope nonetheless gives Scatcherd a great send-off. Unlike Melmotte, another vulgar intruder into polite society, Scatcherd gets a deathbed scene worthy of the soprano in Italian grand opera. And a death as quick, wrapped up in 3 sentences, his final words about his son. Tell him how his father died like a beast because he could not keep himself from drink. The setting moves to the doctor's, where Mary is going to endure her expulsion from the hall in the company of Patience, who views Frank's courtship as a sign of his immaturity, and Beatrice, who wants to indulge in long bouts of sisterly weeping over the star-crossed affair. Little do they know that Lady Arabella wants to double down on Mary's sentence. She has ascribed her first victory, that of exiling Mary from the hall and gained over a man she has always somewhat feared, to her own strength and the justice of her cause. Now she has deemed it imperative to forbid Beatrice and Mary to meet at all, and marches down to the doctor's to announce and impose her will. There follows a splendid scene of indignation, especially on the doctor's part, and she is routed. Her departure is a little masterpiece of understatement. Dr. Thorne, she said, I think you have forgotten yourself. You must excuse me if I say that after what has passed, I... Certainly, said he, fully understanding what she meant, and bowing low as he opened first the study door, then the front door, then the garden gate. And then Lady Arabella stalked off, not without full observation from Mrs. Yates Umbleby and her friend Miss Gustring, who lived close by. Not only is she left speechless and unable to utter the condemnation she feels he deserves, but the swift succession of doors and gates opened for her suggests that her flight, which, worst of all, is witnessed by 2 other ladies who, we do not need to be told, will have the news around Greshamsbury before Lady Arabella crosses her own threshold. Poor Lady Arabella, after failing so abjectly to assert herself over a social inferior, seeks to do so at home. Firstly, her daughter, Beatrice, must promise to sever all relations with the Thornes. Beatrice certainly acknowledges her mother's authority, but does not utter the promise demanded of her. More importantly, her mother hesitates to insist upon it. Lady Arabella's success with her husband is even poorer. He, the reprobate, goes so far as to envy the doctor's sway over his wife. But she has no chance there. We have been told, earlier in the previous chapter, that Thorne, apart from being Mr. Gresham's dear friend, is also the legal holder of Sir Roger's property, and as such, the holder of all the mortgages on Mr. Gresham's property. Lady Arabella, in this matter, even before she starts to argue her case, has already had the rug pulled from under her feet. Meanwhile, Fred is due to come home and once again has his abominable effect on the arrangements of the ladies of Greshamsbury. This time, Mary goes to Boxall Hill, though not without hesitation on the part of the doctor. Why the hesitation? We are told only of certain considerations, and it is left at that. However, off he goes, and a certain comedy of manners ensues. Once again, the awkwardness of status comes up. Lady Scatcherd feels her title is a mockery, at least in the eyes of others, and reacts to Mary as she has been brought up to react to in genteel ladies. She wants to serve. Mary, on the other hand, seeks to put the relationship on the footing required by the title Mrs. Scatcherd bears, but finds it very difficult to impose this proper relationship. Nonetheless, they find it easy to talk. In fact, so easy that the widow almost stumbles into revealing the fate of that other Mary, Mary Scatcherd, and the part that the Thorne family played in it. One reason the doctor may have had for hesitating to introduce Mary to Boxall Hill is the likelihood of meeting there one Lewis Scatcherd. That likelihood becomes a certainty when the baronet comes down from London for a visit. Once there, and in the vicinity of Mary Thorne, the transformation his father had hoped for begins to take place. He forswears sack for a considerable time, at least that's how it feels, and becomes presentable. Thorne feels keenly the contrary urges of his hopes and his conscience, and needs all his energy to be able to wish Sir Lewis success on his path to redemption. To the man himself, redemption needs a helping hand, Mary's hand, to be precise. He offers to take Mary Thorne off the doctor's hands, doing her the honour of his baronetcy with its 10,000 a year. Just as with the father, so with the son is Thorne put in a very awkward place. To neither can he say what he obviously thinks. You're not good enough for her. Old Scatcherd probably sensed this. Young Scatcherd doesn't. All the same, the blessing is withheld, along with all hope of its ever being granted. Frank returns and appalls his mother. He hates money, will be a lawyer, or a doctor, or an engineer, or take a farm, but he will not marry money. He rides to Boxall Hill, and after an awkward encounter with the doctor on the way, finds Mary on her donkey. It's a marvellous scene between the two of them. He manages to put her on the spot, so that she must reject him outright, or even by her silence, let it be understood that she is his. The tension builds. She neither sends him packing nor utters a word of encouragement. Finally, he says that he cannot stay, and finally she speaks, though only to say, "I did not know that you were so hurried." But she says it in such a way that the scene turns on this insubstantial sentence, allowing Frank to ask her directly, "Will you be my wife?" Still she hesitates. Still he presses, his arm upon her knees. She can only exclaim, "Oh, Frank," and then Lewis Scatcherd turns up. Frank, buoyant, returns home to speak to his father, who cannot oppose him, but is able to postpone the event for a year. He reveals Mary's history, which, Frank announces, makes no difference and never could have. Mary had previously resolved to tell all she knows, and does so, to be thanked with a kiss. So too does the doctor. It is a veritable round of confessions and revelations which have no effect on anything. But as he has agreed to do, Frank absents himself from Greshamsbury for his full allotted period, 12 months and a day, as Trollope puts it whimsically. Despite what he witnessed in the garden, Sir Lewis believes that his title and 10,000 a year trump Frank Gresham's offer easily, and should enable him to at least wrap his arm around Mary's knees. They don't. He proposes, is refused once, and then again, very firmly. The game is up. He returns to London, and to the only redemption in reach, drink. Meanwhile, Mary is feeling the harshness of the new regime. By now, the only person she can speak to is her uncle. Of course, she tells him of her meeting with Frank and seeks his advice. Thorne cannot advise. What he would love to be able to say, he cannot, because it relies on the death of another. But nor can he say the opposite while that possibility remains. Chapter 32 introduces us to Patience Oriel's brother, the parson Caleb. He is presented as one tempted by high church glitter, and briefly by some of its more ascetic practices, such as daily morning mass. A certain misgushing makes use of the obscurity of winter mornings to lay siege to him, with little success, for his sister Patience has determined early on that Beatrice Gresham should be his hearth companion, and so it comes to be. Trollope has depicted Beatrice as a flighty, romantic thing, and obviously thinks even less of Caleb Oriel, since the betrothal is arranged in a paragraph, without the merest mention of a sigh, transient despair, or jubilation. Beatrice wants Mary as a bridesmaid, as she has always said. When Patience passes on the news, Mary asks her to try and arrange a meeting with the bride-to-be. Mary does come to visit her friend and is full of natural elation until Frank is mentioned and Mary confesses her feelings towards him. Beatrice is thunderstruck. She has always been strong in Mary's defense because she has assumed that the mad pursuit of impossible love was all on his side. She has been able to oppose her mother because she believed Mary traduced by accusations of scheming. Has her mother been right all this time? Beatrice leaves with her spirits deflated. Dr. Thorne receives news that St. Louis is in a bad way and is likely to land on his doorstep. Mary wants to go to Boxall Hill. The thought of one flight suggests another. Would it be better if they both left Greshamsbury, never to return? Uncle and niece reject this course of action as cowardly. Chapter 34 has a title, but it could well be replaced by a sentence Trollope uses twice on the next page. Thus everything was going wrong at Greshamsbury. Sir Lewis has arrived in a barouche and four, and has hired his own attorney, a Mr. Finney, to spare no effort in getting hold of the capital currently in the hands of Mr. Gresham. Meanwhile, that man's own lawyers have taken on a financial firm to look after his affairs, and they send in Mr. Mortimer Gazeby, who does indeed gaze with a gimlet eye and is not indulgent. Lewis settles himself at the doctor's with his repugnant man Joe, and is intent on showing Thorne's cellar the attention he feels it has been lacking. He has deteriorated even further. The chapter ends with an element unusual in Trollope, violence. Joe has pushed his luck with Thorne's maid, Bridget, who has responded with a rolling pin, not only breaking his nose, but causing him to be exiled to the inn. Mr. Gazeby has decided it will be convenient to take the measure of Gresham's great creditor, Sir Lewis Scatcherd. Such is his influence that he has persuaded the squire, and even the squire's wife, to invite the man and Dr. Thorne with him to dinner. It is, of course, a disaster. Scatcherd feels snubbed from the start, his superiority of position not acknowledged by anyone. His attempts at conversation fail utterly until he starts talking money, at which the ladies flee. With the men, it's even worse, and he drives them away one by one until Thorne calls the fly and Scatcherd is removed with extreme prejudice. Frank Gresham has satisfied the conditions of his exile, 12 months and a day, and is back in town. Will he come? Asks the chapter title. I must quote here, as it's beautifully done, at least in the eyes of sentimentalists like me. Mary is looking out the window at her garden like a suburban lady of Shalott. At any rate, he won't come here, she said. And so with a deep sigh, she turned from the window into the room. There he was, Frank Gresham himself, standing there in her immediate presence, beautiful as Apollo. Her next thought was how she might escape from out of his arms. How it happened that she had fallen into them, she never knew. It's the same technique as the one he uses in the climactic scene of Ayala's Angel, and it's equally effective here. And here, now, Mary does finally utter the word Frank has been begging of her for so long. So, the lovers are united, at least in intent. They have both declared and committed themselves. That essential step is complete. Yet the same obstacles confront them as have done so from the start of the novel, and can be summed up in a single word: money. Upstairs, under the watchful eye of Janet, lies Sir Lewis Scatcherd. Mary's mind has been elsewhere. She has forgotten about him. The doctor has not. Mary tells him of Frank's visit and awaits his advice. He has none to give. That's it from me.